Parents usually leave behind a house, some savings, or maybe a beloved family heirloom. Cecilia Mitchell got a rusted padlock and the deed to a derelict $10 garage in suburban Detroit. She thought it was a cruel final joke until she forced the rotting wooden doors open. Cecilia Joanne Mitchell sat rigidly in the leather chair, staring at the polished mahogany table of Reed and Associates. The Chicago skyline loomed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, gray and unforgiving, much like the mood inside the room. At 32, Cecilia was accustomed to disappointment. As a struggling freelance architectural preservationist, she lived paycheck to paycheck, forever chasing past due invoices. But today's disappointment felt uniquely suffocating. It had been 3 weeks since the fatal multi-car pileup on Interstate 96 that claimed the lives of her parents, David and Evelyn Mitchell. The Mitchells had not been warm people. They were pragmatists, founders of Mitchell Logistics, a freight empire that spanned the Midwest. They had openly disapproved of Cecilia's life choices, cutting off her financial support the day she changed her major from corporate finance to historic preservation. They hadn't spoken in 4 years. Yet when Harrison Thomas Reed, the family's slick, silver-haired estate attorney, summoned her to his office, a tiny, foolish part of Cecilia hoped for reconciliation, a posthumous olive branch. Harrison cleared his throat, adjusting his gold-rimmed spectacles. He possessed the kind of manufactured empathy that billed at $600 an hour. Cecilia, I know this is a difficult time. Your parents' estate is vast, and the liquidation process for Mitchell Logistics is already underway. Cecilia twisted the strap of her worn canvas tote bag. Just tell me what I need to sign, Mr. Reed. As you know, Harrison continued, opening a thick, leather-bound folio, your parents were deeply involved in various philanthropic endeavors. The majority of their liquid assets, real estate holdings, including the Bloomfield Hills estate, and their stock portfolios, have been placed into an irrevocable trust. He paused, his eyes darting to her face to gauge her reaction. The sole beneficiary of this trust is the Mitchell Foundation for Industrial Innovation. Cecilia blinked. Everything? They left everything to a charity? Yes, everything of substantial monetary value, Harrison replied, his voice smooth and devoid of pity. However, there is one specific asset bequeathed directly to you. He reached into the folio and slid a small, faded manila envelope across the table. It was ancient, the paper brittle and yellowed at the edges. Written across the front in her father's rigid, blocky handwriting was her name. Cecilia. What is this? She asked, her voice tight. According to the addendum filed just 6 months ago, David and Evelyn Mitchell leave to you, Cecilia Joanne Mitchell, the entirety of the contents and the deed to Unit 42 at Oakwood Storage Company, located in Wayne County, Michigan. The property was appraised last week for tax purposes. Its current market value, given the structural degradation of the facility, is listed at approximately $10. Cecilia stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. $10. A garage in a run-down industrial park. It wasn't just an omission. It was a deliberate, calculated insult. They had gone out of their way to appraise a piece of garbage real estate just to quantify exactly how little they thought of her. A $10 garage, Cecilia whispered, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Of course, a final performance review, and I failed. I assure you, Cecilia, the paperwork is entirely legally binding, Harrison said, sounding almost relieved that she wasn't throwing a tantrum. Inside the envelope is the deed, the transfer documents, and the key. She picked up the envelope. It felt surprisingly heavy. Ripping the top open, she tipped it over her palm. A heavy, tarnished brass key fell out, along with a single sheet of folded notebook paper. Cecilia unfolded the paper. There was no heartfelt message, no apology for the years of silence. Just 2 sentences written in blue ink. Don't trust the suits, Cecilia. Some foundations are built on dirt. Cecilia looked up at Harrison. The lawyer was watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He looked like a man trying desperately to appear nonchalant. Did your parents leave any personal correspondence in there? Harrison asked, his tone slightly too casual. Sometimes clients leave instructions regarding funeral arrangements that we miss. Cecilia quickly folded the note and slipped it into her pocket, leaving the key in her hand. No, just the address for the garage. She stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. The grief she had expected to feel was entirely eclipsed by a sudden, burning curiosity and a heavy dose of suspicion. Her father was a ruthless businessman, but he was not a man given to cryptic games. If he wanted to disown her, he would have left her a single dollar. A $10 garage and a warning about suits meant something else entirely. If you decide you want to forfeit the property to the state to avoid the property taxes, my office can handle the paperwork, Harrison called out as she reached for the door handle. I think I'll keep it, Cecilia replied without looking back. It's a family heirloom after all. Rain lashed against the windshield of Cecilia's aging Subaru as she navigated the pothole-riddled streets of the industrial outskirts of Detroit. It was a bleak Tuesday afternoon. The towering, rusted skeletons of abandoned automotive factories loomed like ancient monoliths in the grey mist. According to the GPS, Oakwood Storage Company was at the end of a dead-end street that bordered a sluggish, polluted canal. She pulled through a set of chained gates that had been left wide open, the security booth long since shattered and overtaken by ivy. The storage facility consisted of 6 long rows of corrugated metal units. The paint was peeling in large, scabby flakes, revealing aggressive orange rust underneath. Weeds pushed through the cracked asphalt, reclaiming the land inch by inch. It looked less like a storage facility and more like a graveyard for forgotten things. Cecilia parked near the rusted sign that read "Office." As she stepped out into the drizzle, the door to the office creaked open. An elderly man stepped out onto the concrete stoop. He wore faded denim overalls and a grease-stained Detroit Tigers baseball cap. He leaned heavily on a wooden cane, watching her with sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't match his frail frame. "You're lost," the man called out over the sound of the rain. "Or you're looking for a place to dump a stolen car. Either way, we're closed." "I'm looking for Unit 42, Cecilia said, pulling her rain jacket tight against the chill. "I'm Cecilia Mitchell. My father was David Mitchell." The old man froze. The guarded skepticism on his face melted into something resembling profound relief. He hobbled down the steps, extending a calloused hand. Our son William Holmes. I've been the caretaker here for 30 years. I knew your father. Knew him well." Cecilia shook his hand, surprised by the strength of his grip. "You knew him? My dad never mentioned this place, let alone owned anything here." "David was a complicated man," Hassan said, his gravelly voice dropping to a near whisper. "He paid cash for Unit 42 25 years ago, kept it off the books, told me if he ever stopped paying, or if anything happened to him, a girl with his stubborn jawline would eventually show up with a brass key." Hassan nodded toward her pocket. "You got the key?" "I do." Hassan turned and began walking down the narrow alley between rows C and D. "Follow me." He hasn't been here in nearly a decade. But he paid the rental fee 50 years in advance. Said it was the only safe place left. Safe from what? Cecilia asked, jogging slightly to keep up with the old man's surprisingly brisk pace. From the people he worked with, Hassan replied grimly. David built a freight empire, but you don't get that big without getting into bed with the devil. Your dad realized too late that his company was being used to move things that weren't on any legal manifest. Money, mostly. Dirty money. He tried to build a safety net, a contingency plan. They stopped in front of a unit at the very back of the lot. It was heavily overgrown with thorny blackberry bushes. The number 42 was barely visible through the grime. A heavy, industrial-grade padlock secured the latch, the only thing on the door that looked relatively free of rust. Cecilia's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled the heavy brass key from her pocket. It slid into the padlock with a satisfying click. The lock popped open. With a heavy groan of metal protesting against metal, Cecilia and Hassan grabbed the handle and heaved the rolling door upward. A cloud of stale dust and the heavy scent of old canvas, motor oil, and dry paper poured out into the damp air. Cecilia coughed, waving the air in front of her face, and reached for the flashlight on her phone. She swept the beam into the cavernous darkness. The garage was larger than it looked from the outside. In the center of the concrete floor sat a massive, low-slung shape covered in 3 layers of heavy, dust-caked canvas tarps. Against the back wall sat a heavy iron Mosler safe and a stack of filing cabinets. Cecilia walked slowly toward the center of the room. The silence was heavy, almost reverent. She grabbed the edge of the thick canvas tarp. With a sharp pull, she dragged it backward. The beam of her flashlight caught the gleam of flawless, polished metal, and Cecilia's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a pile of junk. It wasn't old family furniture. Resting on 4 deflated tires was an automotive masterpiece. Its sweeping, aerodynamic lines were painted in a deep, midnight black that seemed to absorb the light. The split rear window, the riveted spine running down the center of the body, the low, aggressive stance. Even with her limited knowledge of classic cars, Cecilia recognized the sheer, impossible rarity of what she was looking at. "My God," Hassan whispered, taking off his baseball cap. "He actually did it. He found it." "Found what, Hassan?" "What is this?" Cecilia breathed, running a trembling hand over the cold steel of the sweeping front fender. "That, Miss Mitchell, is the holy grail of the automotive world," Hassan said, his voice trembling with awe. "It's a 1938 Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic, specifically La Voiture Noire, the black car. It vanished from a train in France in 1941, right before the Nazis could seize it. People have spent their entire lives looking for this car. It's a ghost." Cecilia stared at this machine. "How much is it worth?" "If it's authentic, and it looks authentic." Hassan swallowed hard. "Upwards of $100 million. Maybe more to the right buyer." Cecilia's mind reeled. $100 million. Her parents hadn't disinherited her. They had hidden their true legacy in plain sight, shielding it from the lawyers, the foundation, and the suits. But as Cecilia walked around to the driver's side, she noticed something resting on the cracked leather of the front seat. It was a thick, black leather ledger, bound with a thick rubber band. She opened the heavy door, which clicked open with precision despite the decades, and picked up the book. Beneath the ledger was a manila folder with the logo of Reed and Associates printed on the corner. The same law firm that handled the will. The same firm Harrison Reed operated. Cecilia opened the folder. Inside were detailed shipping manifests, bank transfer receipts, and photographs. The documents didn't just implicate Harrison Reed's father in a massive international money laundering syndicate. They proved that the modern Mitchell Foundation was entirely funded by illicit cartel money, with Harrison Reed acting as the chief architect of the fraud. Her parents hadn't just left her a fortune. They had left her the murder weapon to destroy the men who had likely orchestrated the car crash on Interstate 96. "Hassan," Cecilia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, steady calm as she stared at the documents. "We need to get this car out of here. Tonight." Hassan looked at the sheer size of the vehicle, then at the rusting door. "Miss Mitchell, this car hasn't run in 50 years. We don't have a trailer, and we sure don't have the muscle to push it." Before Cecilia could reply, the harsh crunch of heavy tires rolling over gravel echoed from the front of the storage facility. Headlights cut through the rainy gloom, sweeping across the rusted metal doors. 2 black SUVs had just pulled through the broken gates, and they were heading straight down the alley toward Unit 42. The suits had arrived. The harsh glare of halogen headlights sliced through the freezing Detroit rain, throwing long, jagged shadows against the corrugated metal of Unit 42. The heavy crunch of gravel under thick tires echoed like gunfire. Cecilia Joanne Mitchell stood frozen, the heavy leather ledger clutched to her chest, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "They tracked your phone," Hassan William Holmes hissed, his elderly frailty vanishing in an instant. The old caretaker's eyes were wide, but his movements were terrifyingly precise. "Or they followed you from the lawyer's office. Either way, they aren't here to negotiate." "We can't just leave it," Cecilia yelled over the deafening downpour, gesturing wildly toward the priceless 1938 Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic, resting in the center of the garage. "We leave the car, or we leave in body bags," Hassan snapped, limping rapidly toward the massive iron Mosler safe against the back wall. "Your father didn't build an empire by letting himself get cornered. Help me push." Outside, car doors slammed. The muffled shouts of heavy-set men cut through the storm. Cecilia could hear the unmistakable metallic clack of a firearm being racked. Panic, raw and metallic, flooded her throat. She shoved the ledger and the manila folder into her canvas tote bag, zipped it tight, and ran to Hassan's side. "Push the dial," Hassan commanded, bracing his good shoulder against the side of the heavy antique safe. Cecilia slammed her palms against the cold iron dial and shoved with all her might. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding screech of hidden ball bearings, the entire safe slid 2 feet to the left. Beneath it lay a heavy industrial breaker box built seamlessly into the concrete wall. "Hey, open it up!" a muffled voice roared from the other side of the rusted rolling door. A heavy thud shook the metal, sending a cascade of rust flakes raining down on the Bugatti's flawless black paint. They were using a battering ram. Hassan flipped open the breaker box, bypassing the switches and slamming his fist into a large, unmarked red button hidden in the casing. Immediately, the ground beneath them shuddered. A deep, pneumatic hiss filled the cavernous garage. Cecilia stumbled backward as a massive 10 by 20-foot section of the concrete floor, the exact section holding the Bugatti, Cecilia, and Hassan, suddenly dropped. "Hold on!" Hassan shouted over the grinding roar of heavy machinery. It wasn't just a garage. It was a retrofitted hydraulic freight elevator. As the platform descended into the pitch-black earth, Cecilia looked up. A set of secondary steel blast doors slid seamlessly out from the walls of the pit, closing over their heads just as the rusted tin door of Unit 42 exploded inward. A fraction of a second before the steel ceiling sealed them in darkness, Cecilia caught a glimpse of 3 men in tactical gear rushing into the unit, their flashlights sweeping wildly over what was now a perfectly ordinary, completely empty concrete floor. The blast doors clicked shut with a deafening vault-like thud, leaving Cecilia and Hassan suspended in absolute subterranean silence. Cecilia flicked on her phone's flashlight. The beam illuminated a sprawling, concrete-lined tunnel that stretched out into the darkness. The air was frigid and smelled of damp earth and river water. "Your father was a freight man, Cecilia," Hassan said, his voice echoing softly in the tunnel. He walked over to a heavy electrical panel on the wall and pulled a lever. A row of dim, yellow incandescent bulbs flickered to life, stretching down the long corridor. He knew how to move things unseen. This tunnel connects directly to the old Prohibition-era bootlegging routes beneath the Rouge River. He bought this specific lot 25 years ago just for this basement. Cecilia looked back at the magnificent, sloping curves of La Voiture Noire. Even covered in dust, the Bugatti looked like a predator resting in a cage. He went through all of this just to hide a car? He hid the car to hide the ledger, Hassan corrected gently, tapping Cecilia's canvas bag. The Bugatti is a masterpiece, but that book you're holding, that's the guillotine. Your parents knew they were being hunted. Harrison Thomas Reed and his cartel partners had infested Mitchell Logistics. Your father spent his last 5 years secretly draining the tainted funds, buying untouchable assets like the Bugatti, and documenting every dirty transfer Reed ever authorized. The car is your inheritance. The ledger is your weapon. Cecilia stared down at her bag. The grief that had been numbed by the sheer shock of the day suddenly crystallized into a cold, diamond-hard rage. Her parents hadn't abandoned her. They had been trying to protect her, keeping her entirely estranged and cut off so that when the cartel finally retaliated, she wouldn't be in the blast radius. The fatal multi-car pileup on Interstate 96 wasn't a tragic accident. It was a corporate assassination. "Where does this tunnel lead?" Cecilia asked, her voice entirely stripped of its former tremor. "To an old drainage outflow by the canal. I've got a beat-up Chevy Silverado stashed in an alley 3 blocks away. It's not registered to me," Hassan said, leaning heavily on his cane. "We need to vanish, Miss Mitchell. If Harrison realizes the floor is a decoy, it's only a matter of time before they bring in ground-penetrating radar." "Then we don't give them time," Cecilia said, slinging the heavy tote bag over her shoulder. "We let Harrison think he won. Tonight, we disappear. Tomorrow, we go hunting." They left the Bugatti waiting in the dark, a silent monument to David and Evelyn Mitchell's defiance, and walked into the shadows. The following morning, the sun broke through the Detroit overcast, casting a brilliant, blinding light across the glass facade of Reed and Associates in downtown Chicago. Cecilia sat in a windowless interrogation room on the 4th floor of the FBI's Detroit field office. Across the metal table sat Special Agent Gregory Donovan, a veteran of the Financial Crimes Division. Between them lay the black leather ledger and the contents of the manila folder. Donovan, a burly man with exhausted eyes and a perpetually rumpled suit, closed the ledger with a heavy sigh. He ran a hand over his face. "I've been chasing the financial ghosts of the Sinaloa cartel for a decade. We knew they were washing money through Midwest shipping lanes, but the corporate structuring was impenetrable. Harrison Reed built a fortress. And my father handed you the blueprints?" Cecilia said quietly. "David Mitchell handed us the nuclear codes," Donovan corrected, tapping the thick binder. "Offshore routing numbers, dummy corporations in the Caymans, real estate shell companies, it's all here, along with Harrison's personal signatures. This ledger proves Reed actively orchestrated the laundering of over $400 million. But proving fraud is one thing. Proving he ordered the hit on your parents, on I-96. Donovan hesitated. That's harder. We need a confession. Cecilia leaned forward, her jaw set with the same stubborn determination Hassan had recognized the day before. Then let me get it for you. At 2 p.m., Cecilia dialed Harrison Reed's private cell phone. She sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked FBI surveillance van, parked 3 blocks from the upscale bistro, where Harrison took his daily lunches. Cecilia. Harrison's smooth, heavily modulated voice answered on the 3rd ring. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. Have you decided to forfeit the storage unit? I went to the garage, Harrison, Cecilia said, injecting a perfect dose of trembling fear into her voice. It was empty, just a dirty concrete floor, but someone broke in while I was there. Men with guns. A heavy pause hung on the line. Cecilia, I have no idea what you're talking about. Are you safe? I ran, but I found something in the office before they showed up, Cecilia lied, her voice cracking flawlessly. A book, a black ledger with my father's handwriting. It has your name in it, Harrison, and a lot of bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands. The silence that followed was suffocating. When Harrison finally spoke, the polished, empathetic lawyer was gone. His voice was a razor blade. Where are you, Cecilia? I'm terrified, she whispered. I don't care about the money. I just want to be left alone. If I give you the book, will you leave me out of this? Will you let me live? Of course, Cecilia. Your family, Harrison lied smoothly. Bring it to the old Mitchell estate in Bloomfield Hills. The property is empty. Meet me in the conservatory in 1 hour. Come alone, and this all goes away. Okay, Cecilia said, and hung up. Special Agent Donovan, sitting next to her with a pair of headphones clamped over his ears, gave her a grim nod. You're wired. We'll have tactical teams perimetered around the estate. If he so much as twitches, we move. 50 minutes later, Cecilia walked through the sprawling, overgrown gardens of her childhood home in Bloomfield Hills. The grand stone mansion felt like a mausoleum. She pushed open the glass doors of the conservatory. Harrison Reed was waiting. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his normally pristine silver hair was slightly disheveled. He held a suppressed 9mm pistol by his side, barely trying to conceal it. You're a pragmatic girl, Cecilia, just like your father, Harrison said, stepping out from behind a large potted fern. Put the bag on the table. Cecilia stopped, clutching the canvas bag. You killed them. They were going to the authorities, weren't they? Harrison scoffed, his arrogance easily overriding his caution. Your father was a fool. He built an empire on our capital, and when he found a conscience in his old age, he threatened to burn it all down. He thought he could outsmart us, hide his assets, document our transactions. He thought he could drive to the U.S. Attorney's office and just hand over a flash drive. So you ran them off the road, Cecilia stated, ensuring the microphone taped to her sternum caught every syllable clearly. A multi-car pile-up is a tragedy, Cecilia. It happens every day, Harrison sneered, raising the pistol and pointing it squarely at her chest. Now give me the ledger. I'd hate for lightning to strike the Mitchell family twice in 1 month. You missed one thing, Harrison, Cecilia said, her voice dropping its fearful cadence, replacing it with absolute chilling calm. And what's that? My father didn't just leave me a book, Cecilia said, taking a deliberate step back toward the door. He left me a $10 garage. Before Harrison could process the statement, the glass doors of the conservatory exploded inward. FBI! Drop the weapon! Drop it now! A dozen laser sights painted Harrison's chest in a grid of terrifying red dots. Heavily armored tactical agents swarmed the room from every entrance. Harrison froze, his eyes wide with sudden, catastrophic realization. The pistol slipped from his fingers, clattering uselessly against the expensive marble floor. Cecilia watched without a trace of emotion as the agent slammed the silver-haired attorney against the wall, locking heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. Donovan walked into the room, holstering his weapon. He looked at Harrison, then nodded respectfully at Cecilia. "We got it all on tape, Miss Mitchell. It's over." Cecilia looked around the empty conservatory, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the past month finally lift from her shoulders. "Yes, it is." 6 months later, the prestigious classic car auction at Pebble Beach, California, was completely silent. The glittering Pacific Ocean provided a stunning backdrop, but nobody in the packed pavilion was looking at the water. Thousands of millionaires, collectors, and automotive historians were staring, transfixed, at the center stage. Resting under the brilliant stage lights was a flawless, midnight black 1938 Bugatti Type 57S Sea Atlantic. Every inch of La Voiture Noire had been meticulously restored to its original, breathtaking glory by Asan William Holmes, who currently sat in the front row, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo and beaming with pride. Cecilia stood just off stage, watching the renowned classic car broker Simon Kidston take the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kidston's crisp British accent echoed through the silent pavilion, "we are here today to witness history. A phantom resurrected. The bidding for the lost Atlantic will commence at $50 million. The room erupted into a frenzy of raised paddles. The price skyrocketed in seconds, shattering every automotive record in human history. 60 million, 80 million, 100 million. When the gavel finally fell, the final price was an astounding $114 million. Cecilia smiled, turning away from the cheering crowd. She didn't need a corporate empire, and she didn't need the Bloomfield Hills estate. With the cartel dismantled, Harrison Reed serving a double life sentence in federal prison, and her parents' names entirely cleared, she had finally found her peace. She used the auction funds to establish the true Mitchell Foundation, a legitimate, highly vetted charity dedicated to historical preservation and protecting whistleblowers against corporate retaliation. She bought her son a beautiful cottage overlooking Lake Michigan, complete with a massive state-of-the-art mechanics garage. And as for Unit 42 at the Oakwood Storage Company, Cecilia bought the entire industrial park. She leveled the rusting metal sheds and the weed-choked asphalt, transforming the forgotten lot into a sprawling, vibrant community park for the local neighborhood. She left only one small bronze plaque near a beautiful oak tree in the center of the green space. It read, "For David and Evelyn, built on solid ground." Don't forget to smash that like button if you're hooked on this mystery. Share this video with your friends who love a good real-life thriller, and make sure to hit subscribe and ring the bell, where Cecilia fights for her life to protect her $100 million inheritance. You won't believe what happens next.